At first, everything seemed fine. She had gone out for drinks with her coworkers, but something felt strange when I called home around 10:30 p.m. and she still wasn't back. On top of that, in the past month, I had answered the phone 3 times only for the caller to hang up immediately. Normally, it wouldn't have been a big deal. It had only happened once in the entire past year, but it still felt odd. My doubts started to grow, and that's when I decided to start my 2-week program. Kate probably thought she was living with a man who couldn't communicate, someone who avoided pointless arguments and worldly concerns. Instead of asking her for the salt, I would just quietly hand it to her. When she asked about the weather, I would simply pass her a scrap of newspaper showing the temperature. If she asked me to make dinner, I'd just wave silently as she left for work. It became a kind of daily routine. I spoke as little as possible. Kate could sense my pain and anger, but she didn't seem to care at first. However, over time, something changed. She started to improve, which was rare in her family. She even apologized once. Her morning kisses became noticeably more affectionate. When I left for work, she would lean over and hug me as we watched TV. I sometimes wondered if I should say something or just rub her shoulder. Before bed, and occasionally while I was reading the newspaper and drinking coffee, she showed small signs of affection. It was unusual, and slowly, my anger began to fade. After all, it's hard to stay mad for days without speaking. Still, I stuck to my silence as much as I could. Before saying anything, I would think carefully if it was necessary, and most of the time, it wasn't. I focused on listening, observing, and holding back. About a week after an argument, Kate suggested we be intimate again. I wasn't sure if she really wanted it, or if it was just a way to make peace. After dinner, she barely spoke for 6 minutes, sharing a few work stories. Then she said, "Come on, Steve, I need something else now." Suddenly, she stood up, smiled, grabbed my hand, and pulled me along, leaving the dishes behind. I asked if our distance had changed because of my silence, or if maybe we had simply grown apart. Back in the bedroom, I stayed quiet. A familiar warmth surrounded us as we connected, gently and naturally. I chose not to say a word. It felt strange. After our argument had created distance, silence now seemed to bring us closer. When we finished, I turned away from her, and she cuddled up to me, letting out a content sigh. We lay there in silence. I had no idea how she really felt about it. She seemed cold and emotionless to me. I couldn't tell whether the distance was still growing or if the silence itself had caused it. Frustration built up inside me as the days went by, and Kate remained silent. One evening during dinner, Kate suddenly shouted, "I'm not sure what you can even say." After a moment, I calmly replied, "I'm not sure what you want me to say." Her response surprised me. She said she didn't want a husband who acted like a mannequin. She wanted someone who shared his feelings and talked to her. I laughed inside and admired her sharp comment. "Great sentence, Kate," I thought. "But just last week you were complaining that I never stopped talking." Kate was clearly upset. "Figure it out, Steve. Your silent, isolated behavior has gone too far," she snapped. I paused before answering, partly confused and partly wanting to avoid provoking her. "To be honest, Kate, I'm not sure what you want. First, I talk too much, and now I talk too little. How am I supposed to get it right?" She glared at me angrily. "Please stop this behavior immediately. Just be the man I married." "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "You said I'm not too talkative now?" Kate, still angry, spoke quickly. I paused again before answering. "Okay, Kate, but your words made me think. Maybe I talk a lot without actually saying anything." I thought about it for a moment, then gave her a little grin. In a strange way, this whole situation had taught me something. She grinned back, almost warmly, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the connection between us, a connection we hadn't shared in months. I wanted to talk about our marriage, not to argue, but to truly understand her perspective. But before I could say anything else, Kate stood up and left the table without answering. She ignored me for the rest of the evening. It felt unfair, especially since I had genuinely tried to understand her feelings. Even though our conversation ended badly, I woke up the next morning with a glimmer of hope. At first, Kate still treated me coldly and distantly. She said she wanted me to talk more, and I hoped that maybe, just maybe, our relationship could become loving and normal again. But it turned out Kate wasn't really interested in keeping the conversations going. She seemed more focused on ending them. Her frosty look and sharp comments at breakfast showed that the ice between us hadn't melted. In the days that followed, nothing really changed. We kept our contact minimal, sticking only to the bare essentials. It felt strange because it had only been a short time, but Kate's behavior had already changed, whether as a planned punishment or out of deep anger towards me. I couldn't tell. After a few days, she seemed visibly disturbed. She would come home from work and head straight for the shower. During dinner, she barely spoke and seemed completely elsewhere. She let countless attempts at conversation just slip by. This wasn't just a silent protest out of anger. She seemed obsessed with something else entirely. Even though I asked her several times how she was feeling, she only ever mentioned problems at work. Her posture was subtly tense, and she kept avoiding eye contact. I wondered what was really bothering her. Although I was confused, I thought it would be wiser to wait and see how things would develop. The next day at work, I was called into Ernie Mars's office during my lunch break. He handed me an envelope and began to explain what he had found. "I'm sorry, Steve," he said, "but this confirms your suspicions. They're not even trying to hide it. She picks him up in her car in the afternoons. I've seen it several times in the parking lot." He went on to explain that the man lived in an apartment on the second floor, behind a house on Hill Street. It had been easy to take pictures using a telephoto lens. I wrote him a check, shook his hand, thanked him, and left. I had always been a reliable employee throughout my career, but that day, I didn't return to work. Instead, I drove straight home and left a note saying I was sick. At home, I looked through the pictures carefully and then put them back into the envelope. The only real surprise was the man in the photos. It was Adam, one of the groomsmen at my wedding with Kate. He had always thought Kate was very beautiful, although he wasn't my best man. She had mentioned him often during our conversations, but I never saw him as a threat. Adam had always shown a remarkable enthusiasm for women, both back then and now. I couldn't remember ever seeing him without a woman at his side. People used to say he was always happy with what he had. Even though I knew the tears would come later, at that moment I just felt a cold, heavy lesson sinking in. I thought back to the last time Kate and I had been intimate. Maybe now I finally understood why she had started saying I talked too much, even in bed. I spent a long time sitting by the window, thinking about everything I had lost. I grabbed the pictures and looked through them again. They looked exactly the same as when I had first seen them. When Kate got home, she found me lying on the couch doing nothing. "Hello, darling, is everything okay? Tell me what's wrong," she asked, still hoping for a normal answer. I just glanced at her and stayed silent. My face showed little emotion. I wasn't especially angry, just hollow. "Steve, is something bothering you? Why are you just sitting here?" she asked again. Kate sensed the discomfort in the room. She began to understand that something wasn't right. Her tone showed a mix of concern and irritation. She must have felt the tension. "Steve, what's going on? Did something happen today?" she asked. "Or are we back to the silent treatment again?" she added mockingly. I immediately sat up. "How long have you been seeing him?" I asked, my voice almost begging. Kate recoiled in shock and instinctively pulled back. She slumped into a chair across from me. "What are you talking about?" she said. I stayed silent, watching her closely. She studied me, trying to figure out what I knew. Finally, she caved. "Steve, what is this all about? I'm not seeing anyone. Where is this nonsense coming from?" Her face turned pale as she struggled with her hands, finally pressing them firmly into her lap. The silence between us became unbearable for her. "Steve, could you please explain the basis for this accusation?" she said, her voice shaking. "How dare you suggest something like that? Maybe it's your own guilty conscience speaking," she added, locking eyes with me, hoping to turn the accusation around. I still said nothing. Finally, she lost her patience. "I'm going to change," she said, her voice defeated. She turned to leave for the bedroom, but I stopped her. I held out the envelope and asked her to stay. Without a word, I pulled out one of the photos and handed it to her. The picture showed Kate curled up on Adam's bed. She looked at the photo, sighed, and instinctively turned away from it, as if it were something poisonous. She sank back into her chair, her face burning red, and turned away from me. "Stephen," she murmured. "This. Steve." She couldn't finish the sentence. Her eyes were full of shame and fear. Finally, I gently asked her to say something. I needed understanding, needed her to explain. She pulled herself together, hugged herself tightly, leaned back as far as she could, and shook her head in disbelief. "Darling," she finally whispered, "I owe you an explanation." I said nothing and waited for her answer. The silence stretched endlessly. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, she cried out desperately, "Steve, please don't leave us like this. Let's talk about it." After a moment, I calmly replied, "I'm ending this relationship." Then I walked to the bedroom and began hastily packing my things. "Please wait, Steve. I'll explain everything. Just don't leave me. Please reconsider," she screamed. I turned to her. Our eyes met. She stared at me, pleading, but my resolve was unshakable. A moment later, she looked away. I waited patiently until she found the courage to face me again. Her eyes were full of tears. "You were part of this too," she said softly, as if in disbelief. I felt the urge to ask, "What are you talking about?" But instead, I stayed quiet and gestured for her to continue. "Adam told me everything," she said. "At the time, I was angry with you, but he was so convincing, I started to believe him." "Kate, I need you to tell me everything," I said. She began explaining. She had bumped into Adam by chance a little over a month ago at the store. They knew each other. He was charming, friendly, sometimes even flirty. During their chat at the supermarket, Kate mentioned that I was away on a business trip. That afternoon, Adam showed up at her door unexpectedly, with a pizza and a bottle of wine. He said he didn't want her to be alone while I was away. At first, the evening was relaxed and friendly. But as time passed, Adam's mood shifted. He seemed tense and uneasy. When Kate asked what was wrong, he got upset and told her that I was cheating on her. His story was persuasive. He claimed I had been in a relationship with another woman for weeks. He described her in detail, how she looked, where we met, even how I had supposedly spoken about her in bed. He said I praised those business trips, and that made Kate cry. Adam comforted her, rubbed her back gently, said all the right things. He told her he couldn't believe a man would ever betray a woman as beautiful and sexy as she was. He promised to be there for her, to make her feel valued and supported. Time passed. The evening blurred, and before she knew it, they were in bed together. Eventually, the truth came out. It was all a lie. All of it. I stayed calm and didn't show much emotion. Kate, on the other hand, looked crushed. She told the rest of the story in a broken voice. She insisted it had only been about the physical connection, nothing more. If it hadn't been for Steve's affair with Julia, she said, Adam and I would have never realized what a great couple we could be. She told me how Adam brought up Joanna, another woman. When she first heard that name, Adam had smiled smugly. That raised Kate's suspicions, and she started asking him questions. But Adam couldn't remember the details he had once told her. He was vague. He couldn't describe the woman or explain how they'd met. Everything fell apart. That's when Kate realized he had made it all up. She lost control and confronted him. Instead of denying it gently, he laughed. A cruel, cold laugh that cut through her. Her face flushed with anger. He just shrugged it off and said it was all a story, a made-up narrative to manipulate her. Kate said she was furious. She got up, got dressed, and called him a liar over and over. She told him how disappointed she was, how lucky he was that she didn't tell me, because I would have certainly confronted him. But Adam didn't care. He leaned back in his chair, grinned arrogantly, and showed no remorse. I can't believe how stupid I was, she whispered. He fooled both of us. Suddenly, she broke down. Tears streamed down her face. Her body seemed to collapse in grief as she buried her head in her hands. Even though part of me wanted to comfort her, a bitter truth had taken center stage. Was Kate really the kind of person who would believe the most ridiculous lies, just because she wanted to? I wasn't just angry with her. I was furious with Adam, a friend I had trusted for 15 years. I stayed silent as Kate cried, inconsolably. A few minutes later, I made a decision. As I reached into my bag, she looked up at me, nervous. I took her phone, then went into the kitchen and the bedroom to disconnect both landlines. I carefully tucked them under my arm. As I headed out the door, I looked back at Kate and told her quietly, "I'll be back soon. Stay here. Don't talk to anyone." Though my voice was soft, she nodded, a mix of fear and resignation in her eyes. I focused on staying calm during the drive to Adam's place, forcing myself to breathe evenly and act normal. When Adam opened the door, he looked surprised and a bit nervous. But I smiled and greeted him casually. "Hey man, I've been looking for you. Thought we could have a couple of drinks, maybe catch the Phillies game. Kate's in a meeting right now." I noticed the suspicion in Adam's eyes, but he still smiled and said, "Sure, come in." He acted friendly. Always nice to have someone treat me to a beer. "So, Steven, how have you been?" We sat down in his living room, chatting in front of the TV where a game was on. I kept a cheerful tone, even though I knew the truth. Adam gradually relaxed, thinking this visit was just a coincidence. It took over an hour of small talk before I could steer the conversation toward more personal topics. My calm, friendly smile seemed to put him at ease, even when I carefully asked about his romantic life. He looked a bit uncomfortable at first, but I took the chance to share a casual story about a girl I once dated back in school. I mentioned how she would talk endlessly during intimate moments, which used to drive me crazy. Adam took the bait. "Oh, I totally get that," he said, chuckling. "Personally, when I'm in bed, I just want to focus on the act. The sweet talk? Save it for before or after." He laughed again, clearly pleased with his remark. Then, feeling more confident, he went on. He talked about how so many women he met claimed to want love and affection, only to later reveal they were just toying with him. He grinned smugly and leaned in a bit closer, wearing that same arrogant expression I had come to know too well. That's when I asked him, calmly, what he thought about Kate. The question froze him in place. His eyes widened with shock. I waited for a long pause, then decided to push forward. I told him I already knew. This wasn't just curiosity. I wanted the full story. He looked afraid but nodded, realizing there was no point in lying anymore. His eyes stayed locked on mine, filled with guilt. He started talking. His version matched Kate's. He admitted he had always been attracted to her. For months, he had flirted with her every time they crossed paths. When he found out she was alone one afternoon, and he didn't have a girlfriend at the time, he saw his chance. At first, he thought he might just get close to her romantically. But when he realized Kate would never cheat without reason, he invented the story about my supposed affair. That life fed her resentment and sadness. It made her vulnerable and easier to manipulate. They ended up in bed that night. And after that, they met about 5 more times, always at his apartment. Adam admitted that at first Kate was distant, clearly upset about the situation. But later, as he put it, she really got into it. He bragged about their intimacy, using language that made my skin crawl. He described her reactions in disturbing detail, clearly proud of what had happened. But suddenly, he stopped. His earlier arrogance faded. His hair had already been cut very short, almost shaved, giving him a strange, awkward look. And I couldn't help but picture him, in the near future, wearing hats to cover the shame. "Are you ready?" I asked, my tone gracious but bitter. He hesitated. Then, "Yeah, it's over. She found out yesterday." Adam explained that Kate had started questioning him. When he couldn't even remember the name of the woman he had claimed I was seeing, she figured out the whole story was fake. She got furious and ended everything. Suddenly, I felt the urge to leave. There was no more I needed to hear. I felt hollow, drained. "Adam," I said quietly, "you've been involved in things a man your age should know better than to even touch." Then I stood up. "Brother, this ends now," I said coldly. "You might be tempted to retaliate. But remember, if this goes any further, you'll have to explain everything you've done. And I think we can agree that it's best the authorities don't get involved." He nodded slowly, his eyes stuck on me with a strange mix of shame and suppressed anger. As I headed for the door, he asked, "Should I untie you before you go?" I smiled faintly. Completely unnecessary. I left the door slightly open. With just a little effort, he'd be able to get up. I didn't look back. About an hour later, I returned home. Kate was sitting on the sofa in a bathrobe, her hair still damp. She looked tense, a mixture of fear and sadness written all over her face. After picking up the cell phones I had taken earlier and scattered around the apartment, I sank into the armchair across from her. We looked at each other in silence. Finally, she broke it. "What have you done?" she asked sharply. I answered coolly. "Adam and I had a nice little talk. I doubt he'll be bothering us again. And no, I didn't use violence." She muttered something and scowled. "To be honest," she added bitterly, "I almost wish you had. That man is disgusting. But no, the consequences wouldn't be worth it." Then she looked me in the eye. "Steve, can we forget about all this?" She looked at me with sadness in her eyes, horrified by her own foolishness. "I know I've been stupid," she said softly, "but I love you. And I know you love me. Please, please find the strength in your heart to forgive me." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her for a long time. And in that silence, I realized something. We had fallen into the habit of not communicating. Somehow, over time, the silence had become normal. It was unbelievable, but I finally admitted it to myself, and it was true. Tears welled up in Kate's eyes. The next morning, she came into the kitchen early. Her face lit up when she saw breakfast and coffee already waiting on the table. "Oh, darling, this is wonderful," she said with a bright smile. But then she stopped mid-step as she walked over to kiss me, her eyes landing on two large suitcases standing by the door. "Steve, are you going somewhere?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is that what this means?" Tears filled her eyes. A part of me wanted to walk out silently, to mirror the quietness that had marked so many of our fights. But I couldn't do it. Not like that. I asked her to sit down across from me and handed her a cup of coffee. "It's over," I said. "I've made up my mind. I've seen it all, even if I can't fully explain how or why we ended up here. Our love, it started to fade more than a year ago. We were good at the beginning, but then we started to irritate each other. Anger, arguments, they became the norm. Moments of warmth and closeness became rare. Your affair with Adam wasn't the only reason I decided to leave, but it showed me something I can't ignore. You're not naive. You didn't believe a lie because you were fooled. You chose to believe it. If I had really been cheating on you, would you have just accepted someone else's word for it, without ever coming to me? Without even asking if I was okay? Adam's made-up story about my affair was all it took for you to sleep with him. And worse, you continued to do it. You even implied that you preferred the way he ignored things to the way I tried to handle them. That was the moment I realized I didn't recognize you anymore. The woman I married wouldn't have acted like this. You slipped so easily into someone else's bed. If it hadn't been that easy, none of this would have happened." I paused and let her take it all in. She sobbed quietly, her hands covering her face. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were filled with desperation. I stared at her one last time, hoping, even then, that she might say something, that she might convince me I was wrong, that she could show me there was still love between us. But there was nothing left to say. I stood up, walked to the door, and said quietly, "Goodbye, Kate." The divorce and packing up the rest of my things happened quickly. In court, Kate cried uncontrollably, begging me to reconsider. It was hard to see her like that, really hard, but I couldn't risk falling back into the same broken cycle. 2 days after we split up, the unthinkable happened. While Adam was inside a grocery store, Kate, in a state of emotional collapse, found his car, filled it with gasoline, and set it on fire. The car was already in bad condition, but it was still shocking. Fortunately, Adam made it out safely. Kate was arrested and admitted to a psychiatric facility. Doctors said she had gone into a state of shock. They expected her to recover and eventually live a happy, stable life again.